welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Mike Brodinski. Christopher K. Shortell has the night off, well deserved. The issue that we raise on this episode of the Citizen Mike Show was whether or not the town of Wallingford is on the cusp of losing so many volunteer firefighters and medical responders that we would have to make that loss up by hiring additional career personnel. And that is an untenable trade. As we all know, the career firefighters and medical responders are a lot more expensive than the volunteers. So the question is, how bad is the problem? What do we do about it? And what do we need to know in order to understand what course of action that we should take? We have two guests on the show that help us through this, and they have different perspectives, but they're not competing perspectives necessarily. The first guest is Deputy Chief Joe Czentnar, Deputy Chief of the Wallingford Fire Department, and he gives sort of the management perspective. In the second clip, we have Eddie Garlick, who was formerly the Assistant Chief of the East Wallingford Fire Department. Let's hear what we have to say. We'll be back to you at the end of the two clips. 3, 2, 1, go. Welcome to the Citizen Mike Show, Deputy Chief Joe Czentnar, Deputy Chief of the Wallingford Fire Department. Deputy Chief, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Mike. I'm glad I could do this.
Yeah, we wanted to talk to you about the Volunteer Firefighters Program and some general questions as to how all that fits into the safety of the town of Wallingford. And the Citizen Mike Show, I guess, comes from the perspective of that someone in need, that someone who has an emergency, you know, whether it's a fire, an auto accident, a medical event, from their perspective, is the community safe? And then I think several clicks down the list is the perspective of the taxpayer. And everyone knows what that perspective is, but we have not heard the perspective of management really, and that's where you come in, management of the Wallingford Fire Department. So we wanted to get your views on a couple of things.
Absolutely.
Before we get going, I want to read something that'll kind of set the table for us. And what it is, it's on the website of the National Volunteer Fire Council. I mean, they seem to be straight shooters, but they just set out sort of trends that I think we all know. This is dated a little bit. It goes back to April of last year. But see if this resonates with you. They issued a report in 2017. So the data, you know, is about 3 years old. But the report was collected via a national survey of fire departments and estimated that there were 682,600 volunteer firefighters in the United States in 2017. That is down significantly over the past 2 years. The volunteer firefighter numbers in 2016 and 17 are the lowest recorded levels since the National Volunteer Fire Council began the survey. It goes on to say, I'm skipping around a little bit, but there's a quote here from the spokesman for that organization. It says, this report should be a wake-up call for everyone who serves in, is protected by, or cares about the volunteer fire service, said National Volunteer Fire Council Chairman Kevin Quinn. We know many volunteer fire departments are struggling to maintain adequate staffing. However, the scale of the loss of volunteer firefighters estimated in this report is really disturbing and something that we need to work as a community and nation to address. It goes on to say these are estimates based on surveys, and he goes on to say that we need to redouble our efforts to help local communities address this, and so on and so forth. I think we've all read in the newspapers the national trend: volunteers are harder and harder to get. Just the way life is in the in these current times, pressures of family, of jobs, people are more mobile, they move out of town. People don't stay in the same town that they were born and raised in necessarily, and they don't have that sense of loyalty. I'm going to stop talking for a minute and pass it off to you.
I'll start out as a fire chief for the department. Our responsibility is to make sure that we're getting people out the door that are well-trained, safely, and being highly effective in providing the service to the community that the community expects to get. Now that varies wherever you go. Here in Wallingford, they may expect to have a fire engine on scene within 4 minutes, or an EMS response vehicle within 4 minutes at their house or at their business. You may live out in a smaller community where it's strictly volunteer, and 10, 12 minutes may be acceptable to them. That may be the norm. But here in Wallingford, we've established pretty much what the community expects, and we strive to maintain that. And we're always checking with the community and making sure that how can we improve it. And we've done a lot of improvements on our service delivery up to just recently, this past July. We added 2 BLS ambulances and an additional career engine company, and all the engines are paramedic. You know, that's based on what we determine what the community needs, and they've agreed with that, and it's worked out well. Going back to the volunteers, I think you know, America was based some values on volunteerism. You know, whether it was volunteer militias back in colonial days, volunteer fire departments, volunteer organizations, fraternal organizations. We've seen all that, and America really embraced that. A lot of people came in. But when you start looking at the fire service as it expanded and what's happened the last 50, 25, or even 15 years ago, it's starting to look much, much different. We've had a basic progressive transition from the brave men and women who made up the fire service of the past, and now we're more technically educated with the modern workforce. Many of the fire departments, like here in Wallingford, we're called an all hazards department. And that means that we are trained to respond to everything from firefighting to ALS medical care, hazardous materials, technical rescue, water rescue, extrication, you name it. When the people aren't sure who to call, they call the fire department. And generally we'll come up with a solution for them.
Yeah.
And with that, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I think the Wallingford Fire Department has a very good reputation. It seems periodically, you know, regularly, there's some sort of a letter to the editor or something on Facebook about how a resident of Wallingford is grateful to the service they got from the Wallingford Fire Department, whether it's the paid career guys or the volunteers. So I think that the community is pretty appreciative of, you know, of the job.
And we pay close attention to that. There was just one in the paper yesterday.
Yeah.
They said they never write in. I know our guys delivered a baby, and it was the grandparents of the baby that was born. Very appreciative. And they said we never write in. Yeah. But we watch that very closely because we want to know, because generally you never get feedback unless it's bad. Yeah, in a lot of different organizations. So we certainly appreciate that. But we strive hard to make sure that our men and women are out there doing a great job.
Yeah. Some factoids, some fun facts for context. Your budget right now is just under 8.8 million for the current fiscal year. You got 3 career firehouses and 2 volunteer firehouses. I didn't double check, but maybe it's in your fact sheet there. Total number of active firefighters. I'm not talking about EMS or I'm not talking about EMS, but line firefighters that go out and fight a fire. Do you have the approximate number at your fingertips?
Well, here, yeah, in the career department, we have 56 line personnel.
Okay.
And we have we have 56 line personnel that staff 3 engines, a ladder truck, and then we have 16 EMTs that staff 2 ambulances. And then we have an EMS officer that works 5 days a week. He also supplements any fire suppression.
And again, some basic information that's going to help us in our
conversation.
Could you quickly, and the operative word is quickly, define the difference between a paramedic and an emergency medical technician, and briefly how their jobs differ?
Sure. Well, a paramedic, to start with, they go to school for approximately 2 years. Some of them get associate's degrees while they're doing that. And their studies involve, they're much more comprehensive. And then when they get out and they get certified or licensed as a paramedic, they're able to do advanced life support, giving, drugs out in the field, doing advanced procedures out in the field for life-saving measures. Whereas an EMT, they're right around, I want to say about 165 hours So if you're going a couple days a week to become an EMT certified, you can probably finish that up in 3 to 4 months and be out in the field. And they can do a lot of things, but they're pretty much basic life support. They can give oxygen, they can give some medications, low-level medications, things of that nature.
Okay.
But they're worlds apart between the two.
Got it. So getting down to business a little bit, in view of the changes, that we've been talking about in the demographics and the pressure on the volunteer corps, what's the role of the volunteers now as compared to the career paid firefighters? I think there might be an impression of some that the volunteers are supplementary. Maybe that's right, and that's why we're having you on the show. That they don't try to respond first. They sort of wait and and fill in the gaps. But how would you better describe the role of the two?
Well, the role of the two have evolved. I mean, in Wallingford here, we have a combination department, which means you have a career division and you have a volunteer division. Years ago, the volunteer division was much more active. People had a lot more time. Social, economic things were different. So they had more time to give of themselves. Standards and certifications were different in order to be certified as a firefighter. So they were more first due. They were part of the first alarm assignments. And typically, if you go back 30 years ago, it's possible that a volunteer station that was strategically located could get to the scene of the incident before the career department that actually turned out where the guys were living in the station. But that role has evolved. And in the last 10, 15 years, with the decline in volunteerism, they have assumed more of a role of a support role for the career division, mostly in cluster type calls. There's a lot of times we get 4 or 5 calls at a time, and we can't handle them. We get tapped out. There's no more trucks left just about. So that's where they come into play, where they're going to be there as a multiplying force. The careers have 4 career shifts, and they work 2 days, 2 nights. And the minimum manning for each shift is 13 for fire suppression and 4 for ambulances. So generally it's 17 people.
I want to focus on the volunteers for a minute. I'm imagining that the volunteers assigned to those stations are largely scattered between their homes or jobs,
Sure.
But are there any that try to stay at that volunteer station all the time? Do they sort of work it out so that it's manned to some degree, or is that not possible?
Well, I can tell you, we've encouraged staffing in the last several years where we've installed beds into the volunteer stations and encourage the staffing. But for the most part, they'll try to staff with a couple of guys on an overnight, but that's not our busiest time. So they're not always there. Generally, they're responding from home.
When there's multiple events, whether it's fire or medical, the likelihood that the volunteers are going to be called in go up on multiple events. I think that's what you said.
That's correct. And I can give you an example. The other night we had a structure fire on North Elm Street.
Yeah.
We had most of the career units tied up and a volunteer engine were at the scene. And then a medical call came in after the fact, and the volunteers were already staffed up. They were able to respond to that EMS call fairly quickly because they were staffed up.
Do you have any ideas how many times the volunteers get out the door and go to respond to an event, no matter what kind of event it may be?
The two companies, they respond to about 700 to 800 calls per year. Overall, the Wallingford Fire Department responds to about 7,000 calls a year.
Okay. And
so it's a small fraction. So if you look at the volunteer companies, I would say on average, maybe twice a day they would get dispatched.
Got it. And have you guys, the leadership of the Wallingford Fire Department, run the numbers on the cost of a career firefighter versus a volunteer, or maybe just the cost of the volunteer program?
As to, it's hard to put a handle on because they have volunteer stations that we maintain.
Okay.
All right. maintain their apparatus. We purchase the apparatus and maintain that. We purchase the gear for them. Every year they get an annual physical, and they have training that they have to do. Then they get there is a couple of rewards. They get a low SAP, which is length of service program, where over a period of time they get sort of a pension type of a setup. And there's also a tax abatement that's tied to it.
Okay.
So to really get the numbers on there, it would be hard to tell you exactly what the number is. I know each firefighter was probably, volunteer. I would say we would spend at the minimum of $1,000, maybe $2,000 per year on them.
And from the perspective of the taxpayer, it seems as though that maintaining a viable corps of volunteers is a lot cheaper than expanding the paid staff. I'm sure you see it that way.
Oh, sure, certainly from a taxpayer, but as a community that uses the end of the end user of the service that we provide, what they say a lot of times, you get what you get, and you can try to rely on that, but then are you going to get the appropriate service that the community expects? And that's like the statement I let out with in the beginning. Right.
But we
try to provide that service that the community expects to provide.
Yeah. But the community is getting the service.
It is.
It is.
It is, right. And we're responsible when we think about the budget.
Yeah.
And we strike a balance between, and running a combination department is a very, very complex organization, where we try to maintain that equality. We recognize that there is a cost savings to the taxpayers. And we try to maintain that. However, we have to balance that with being able to provide the service.
Well, we got to keep the volunteer corps beefed up to a reasonable level. Reasonable level is definitional. I don't want to get too much in the weed there, but I think you would agree. You would agree on that too. We got to keep the volunteer corps viable.
Yeah, well, absolutely. We support that. However, we want to make sure that they're well trained. And that brings in professional standards. Those things have been adopted over the years. The community expects professionalism when they get there. So there's standards that everybody has to meet. Years ago, a firefighter 1 certification, which is a basic level certification, was probably only 100 hours. Now you're looking at several hundred hours. So when you're a volunteer, to find that kind of time in order to get that certification becomes more difficult. And then when you get into the role of it's an all hazards department, where you're responding to medicals, EMS calls, a technical rescue, now there's much more that you need to know and be certified to and be able to attain that professional standard.
So is the volunteer program in Wallingford sustainable given all of these conditions that we've talked about, the challenges and family life jobs?
Well, yeah, I mean, with all the social economic stuff, I mean, it is sustainable. We're not insulated from societal influence and generational behaviors, but volunteerism, as I stated earlier, is in crisis. With all that increasing training and certification requirements, a lot of the membership is aging right now that are volunteers. It's hard to get new people in. A lot of them don't want to be volunteer firefighters. Along with, we see a lot of public safety announcements. They talk about cancer. Cancer is prevalent in the fire service for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
So people considering that career may say, I'm going to pass on that. Maybe I can find a different career.
So how do you encourage, recruit, maintain, do whatever's reasonable necessary to make sure that the Corps of Volunteers doesn't slip so that public safety slips? How do you do that?
Well, what we do is we're being realistic right now. 80% of our call volume is EMS. All right. And that's a big transition from years ago. Like I said, 30 years ago, it was a lot more fire. Well, with fire safety and fire education and building construction requirements and codes that have come into play, we've been able to drop a lot of the fires down. We have less fires, but they burn much more fiercely right now. But we've took on a lot of the EMS response role with ambulances and first responders in the fire service. That's where the focus is right now. So when we market, we have to market effectively. And we talk about this. You talk about a volunteer firefighter, but actually we're looking for volunteer first responders. With that is EMS responders. So if somebody wants to be a volunteer firefighter, they go to a firefighter one course, they go for a couple hundred hours, they get certified, they become a member at a volunteer company. Now all of a sudden there's very few fires to go on and just mostly medical calls. Okay. So now they determine, yeah, now I need to be an EMR or an EMT in order to be able to be effective and contribute to the community and go out on calls.
So would you agree that the number of active volunteer firefighters is on the decline in Wallingford?
Yes, and it has been for quite some time.
Okay, yeah. How are they doing? How are the volunteers doing?
You know, hey, under the circumstances, they're doing well. The ones that are here, every volunteer that's an active volunteer is a bonus for this department and for the community. I think the sustainability for the volunteers is to make sure that they're marketing and recruiting for the right reason, and make sure that they're telling them that these are EMS. So, you know, we're recruiting more and more EMS only volunteer first responders. So that when they do come, they're actually going to be doing things that they thought they would be doing. We're in the middle of restructuring a little bit with the volunteers, operational component of it, and have them focus more on EMS response and maybe get the appropriate vehicles for them so that they can respond effectively.
Okay.
With that, we're hoping that we can give them some sustainability for, you know, the next several years and provide a safe and effective emergency services for the community.
Let's supposing there's a young guy out there, young, strong, vigorous, 23, 24. He's looking for something constructive to do. He's attracted to the fire service, putting out fires, you know, rescuing people. Do we have enough? Do we have enough? Are we going to have enough?
A lot of those people are specifically looking to get on to career fire departments. So we may get them and they'll come here for a couple of years. We'll train them and then they end up moving on. We do a pretty good job here of supplying other communities with candidates for their career departments.
So I'm just wondering if the trend of volunteers are going down, we need volunteer firefighters, whether we're sort of at a tipping point of losing the guys that want to fight fire, volunteers that want to fight fires. Right. If they're going down, and there's just no way we can counteract that. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, that's not, you know, we have good volunteer firefighters that are in Wallingford in the division. And with less fires, what we do is need more training.
Okay.
And more training takes up more time. And we'll retain those folks that want to do it. The problem we're having is getting younger people in that, number one, want to volunteer, and number two, want to do this type of work.
Eddie Garlick, thanks for coming on the Citizen Mike Show. We appreciate it. Good to have you here.
Thank you for the invite.
Yeah, you know, I was reading the paper this morning, the Record Journal, November 17, you know, the date we're producing this this episode. And there was a story about a fire, just a little thing about a fire. And I just want to run it by you and see what you know about it. Because as I understand from talking to you off camera, you have a lot of friends on the volunteer force and you kind of have your ear to the ground. It's impossible not to. But the story goes something like this, that a Hillstead Lane home was extensively damaged by a fire early Monday morning. The residents, you know, were okay. No injuries reported. And here's the interesting part. Firefighters responded to 7 Hillstead Lane at about 6:15 a.m., found the rear of the 2.5-story home engulfed in flames. With mutual aid from 2 Meriden fire companies and coverage from North Haven, crews were able to extinguish the fire in about an hour and a half. So do you know whether or not Wallingford played a role in this? And you know, they're coming from surrounding towns. I mean, where did Wallingford fit into this?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, so Hillstead Lane is a unique area. It has no hydrants. There's no fire hydrants or water supply up there. So the volunteer firehouses in Wallingford would have had to have responded with tanker trucks that carry water to those non-hydrogen areas. Mutual aid would have been brought in from out of town to supply more tankers, and probably a couple of engines from Meriden came in for RIT, rapid intervention, things like that. So Wallingford volunteers definitely played a role in that fire.
Before we go too much further, I want to introduce you to our viewers, just a little bit of biographical information. This comes from a post that you put up on Facebook, I think, over the summer, just a couple sentences. It says, as a volunteer with the Wallingford Fire Department, and this is you writing, I began my service to the town as a junior member in 1987, ultimately retiring from service as a volunteer assistant chief at the East Wallingford Station, Station 8 on July 25, 2020. So you've been around a long time, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And working up the ranks, how long did it take you to become assistant chief of East Wallingford?
Well, I've been chief there, or assistant chief. I was assistant chief there for probably the past 10 years. So working up through the ranks, there's a lieutenant rank, captain, and then to assistant chief. So probably about the past decade, I was the assistant chief over there.
Why did you decide to leave?
Well, there's been a bit of contention between the chief of department, the career chief, and the volunteer ranks on recruitment and training and certification of volunteers. I had thought we had it worked out. I had a meeting with the mayor and then a subsequent meeting with the chief. And we had come to an understanding in that meeting, it was around November of 2019, that the chief was going to support a program which he took out of service back around 2014, I think it was. July came around, the chief reneged on his agreement with us. And that's when I decided I needed to leave the department, because working at this, trying to get training and recruitment going from the inside, it just wasn't happening. I've been trying since 2014. So that kind of sealed the deal for me. And I decided to step outside the department to try and give it an effort from the outside.
So in your years, through the years as a member of the East Wallingford Volunteer, what have you seen as far as the trends go with respect to recruiting, retention, and training?
Well, that national trend, that data, I saw it happening all around us, surrounding communities that were all volunteer, combination career and volunteer firefighters. But the interesting thing that I saw coming up until 2014 was Wallingford was beating that. We were able to, through recruitment and training that we did in town, kind of wash out that national trend and keep on recruiting and training and holding on to new members. So when that all went away in 2014, we saw ourselves in the numbers and the statistics that we ran start to fall in line with that national trend. And now we're at a point where the volunteer service in town is definitely in jeopardy.
Purposes. So what can you do about it? I mean, this is a big bad world out there. How could you possibly, mitigate that trend?
Well, I've made a suggestion, and I don't like to come with just complaints or problems. I'd like to try and suggest things as I move along as well. So in one of the videos that I posted to the Facebook page, I made a suggestion to go back to kind of the model that we had from around 1992 to 2012 to 2014, where we were beating the trend. I suggested a recruitment method, a track to get new members in and get them cleared through medical and background, and then run the program in town. So I honestly think it's worth a shot. And I think in my video, I said, why don't we give it like a 3-year run and see if it brings us back to where we were before. So briefly, but that was ultimately shot down.
Yeah. So briefly, just get a little more specific. So what could you do now that you think would increase recruitment and retention? And why do you think your idea has merit?
Well, just looking at what went on in the past, looking at the numbers, it definitely worked. And then we look at the numbers when it was canceled and we see a steady decline. So I think the evidence is there that if we picked back up to where we were before in some respect or in some framework, I think we could get back to a sustainable place.
Yeah, what specifically was that initiative or that program that you're referring to that you say worked?
Okay. Yeah, so it was pretty much a year-round recruiting effort by volunteers and the career department as well. They used to run ads, things like that in the Record Journal or have pop-ups on local television. So you would recruit year-round, pointed towards a class starting in January for firefighters and EMS. So there's an EMS portion up front called EMR. Back then it was MRT. It's a step below the EMT level. And then after you would do that for a few months and get a certification, you would jump into the fire training program, and that would conclude somewhere around June or July. And then you've got your fully recruited, certified, medically cleared, background check. Your members are good to go and ready in July. And during the course of that, you're also recruiting for the next year. And it was just a cycle that went on. So the training was always done at Central Fire Headquarters. They just did a full refurb within the past 5 years of the entire training ground over there. So it's there and it's there to use. So the cost of the facilities is negligible. I mean, turning the power on and running a truck to do the training in the classroom. The cost that we came up with, now every year since the class was canceled, we'd go back to the chief and say, we'd like to start this up again. We're seeing our numbers really decline and we need help. So they lost all the paperwork at headquarters. They have no documentation of anything that was done from 92 to 2012 when the last in-town class was run. So we actually ran our own class in 2014. So we took numbers from that in town and we came up with about $30,000. Now the chief has countered with his own estimate at around $50,000.
I'll be the devil's advocate because there's always, sort of another side of the story. Sure. Let's use, and frankly, for purpose of the Citizen Mike Show, I don't want to split hairs between $30,000, $40,000, and $50,000 on a budget that approaches $8 million. It's the notion of results. So if you hold a class and it costs $50,000, you do that every year. The challenge to you would be, okay, you do that, you spend $50,000, and let's say you get just 2 guys that stay with the volunteers for more than 2 years. Now, that example could be wrong. It could be right. No one really knows, what the result is going to be. No, and if you get 2 guys, that's $25,000 per guy, and a taxpayer could say, "Oh no, we're not doing that." How would you respond? How would you respond to that?
Well, that's. I mean, we can hypothesize about that, and I've said this to the chief many times. We can say that's going to happen. We don't know until we try. And surely, if that's the case, if we do a few years of this, and that's the case, then the point's been made that it's no longer a productive plan. I'm of the opinion that it would be a productive plan, but nobody knows. It could be 2 guys for 25 grand a piece, or it could be 24 guys for $2,000 a piece. So
yeah, as I understand it from talking to you and others off camera, there's various training programs around the state. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but Gateway College comes up as a place where you can get certified. But I guess under the current arrangement, prospective firefighters or recruits would go out to these other institutions, other training centers, get trained up, pay the money in advance, and then once they pass and get their certification, they have a chance to come back to Wallingford and maybe get reimbursed. Am I close? Was that a close description?
Yeah. Surely, yeah, it is. The only place volunteers looking to volunteer in Wallingford can go if you're coming in off the street. Like if Mike Brudzinski walked in the firehouse right now and said, "I want to be a volunteer," the only place you could go is Gateway. No other place in the state will accept a Wallingford volunteer.
And trying to understand this issue, talking to you and, as I say, others as part of my research for doing the show, I got the impression, but I don't know if it's right, that esprit de corps may be important. And this goes back to my old Army days. You wouldn't know it, but yeah, I was, basic training, all that kind of stuff. And if you have a bunch of guys, struggling to pass a class together, hopefully most of them for Wallingford, you have the equivalent of drill sergeants, barking instructions at them and criticizing them and hounding them and getting them to be trained up. There is a little bit of esprit de corps that forms. And maybe that's important in retention. I don't know. I don't want to overstate it. I mean, if it's not there, it's not there, but I want your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's something that we were able to control when we ran it in town, motivating new recruits, making sure they were trained to the level that we're comfortable with going out and operating with them on the street. And we knew exactly what we were getting. Going to the outside, you're basically going to a school that is there to get a certificate issued. They want the money and they want the awesome pass rate for the class. So they're going to push recruits through and maybe not focus as well as like the Wallingford instructor or the DI, the drill instructor from Wallingford Fire that's going to really drill down on these new recruits, because these are the people we're going to be working with.
Yeah.
There are small independent classes that are run around the state, maybe at another volunteer or another firehouse somewhere, but the schools, the state schools, will not accept the Wallingford volunteer with the process that Wallingford has in place right now.
Yeah, I want to put some data up on the screen. It's up there now, and it shows the number of East Wallingford volunteers through the years starting in 2012.
Yes.
And at the bottom of the slide, we see there were 30, and we go up to this year. These are certified firefighters, is what I should have said, as shown on the slide. Go up to this year, there's 10, maybe there's 11, maybe soon to be 10. And that illustrates the trend in part that we were talking about.
I believe so, yeah.
I'm going to take this slide down there and get another question to you. And that is, it seems like there's more people attached to a volunteer fire station than there are certified firefighters.
Yes.
Walk me through that. Why is that so?
Well, the firehouse is comprised, well, the volunteer firehouses in town, the way they're structured right now, they have explorers, who are the younger folks coming in. They have folks that just do EMS. So they might be emergency medical responder or an EMT, and they don't respond to fires. So they don't have a fire certification. They just want to do medical work. There's social members of the department. Like right now, I'm categorized as a social member because I came off active status, but I'm still part of the organization as a volunteer organization. So there are different people within the department that aren't just certified firefighters.
Using this fire on Holstead Lane that we talked about at the opening of the show, and you said the volunteers from East Wallingford were on the scene. Walk me through how they would know about this fire, how they would get to the scene, and how long it would take them. What do they got to go through?
So volunteers in Wallingford are issued a device. It's a radio pager, basically. You could hear the dispatcher talk, and they'll send out a frequency. It'll beep and alert you, or vibrate and alert you to a call. And then as a volunteer, you would respond to the firehouse if you weren't already at the station if you were staffing the station for the night, or you were there for a drill or for some other reason. If you were away from the firehouse, you get alerted by a pager. That usually takes, on average, the stats for East Wallingford were 2 or 3 minutes to get a truck on the road from an initial dispatch on a radio pager. And then whatever the drive time is from the station to wherever the incident is. And Holstead Lane is pretty far out there.
Yeah, let me stop here. As I imagine it, and this is check me where I go wrong.
Yeah.
As I imagine it, this is like between 6 and 7 in the morning. Yeah. Like if I'm a volunteer firefighter, I'm half asleep, or maybe I'm in the shower. So
for sure.
the pager goes off. Mm-hmm. And so what do they've got to, hurry up, get dressed, collect their gear, get in their private car, race to the East Wallingford firehouse, and then jump on the truck. And you're saying it takes how long to do that? With good luck?
What's that? Oh, on average, when we ran the numbers at the firehouse, and these numbers were also provided by the chief of the career department, who manages all the data, it was 2 to 3 minutes for a truck to get on the road. We all live in pretty close proximity to the firehouse, so we get out pretty quick. And then it's whatever the drive time is to the call.
Okay, so I want to put up another slide that has some additional data on it. It's up on the screen now. And this is Wallingford Volunteer Unit responses. And this is a combination of the North Farms Volunteer Unit and East Wallingford Volunteer Unit. And it comes from public records of the fire department. And it indicates, the reason why I put it up is it indicates the number of times that the volunteers from both houses get out the door and respond. And the reason why I put it up, it shows it's pretty flat, actually. 2016, 1,034 it probably end up at about 950 this year based on the records that I reviewed. I just wanted to put that up so folks get an idea as to how often you get out the door and respond. Chief Czentnar said that's about 10%. of the calls. The career guys handle on their own the other. And while I'm on that, it seems that the trend these days is more towards medical calls than fires.
Yes, sir.
And that 80% of the calls are medical. And so I'm going to put this issue to you. I'm a young guy and I am attracted to the fire service, and I want to fight fires.
For sure. Yeah.
Yet I go through all this training and I get on the job and I find it's one medical after another, one medical after another, one medical after another. You say, where's my fire?
Yeah.
What does that cause some frustration? Does that cause some guys to leave? Just react to that, if you would.
I haven't seen people leave because of that. At the East Wallingford station, we ran about 61% medicals. So that other 39% were car fires and other types of incidents. This year alone has been a very busy fire year for Wallingford. It's got to be upwards of around 20 or more actual structural fires. So the work is there, and the new recruits and the people that are volunteering are definitely hungry. They want to go out and do like the hard work and make a difference. But I've never seen that medical aspect, that 61% medicals, at least at the East Wallingford station, be any kind of a deterrent.
Who are the guys that staff the volunteer fire stations? Just what
kind of townspeople are they?
Yeah, what do they do for a living? Where do they work? Where do they live? I mean,
we've got at East Wallingford, we have people who are auto mechanics or landscapers. We had state troopers. We have physician's assistants, RNs. We have people who are in college. We have one person down at East Wallingford right now that's in med school to be a physician. Accountants, anything you could think of. Anybody that lives in your neighborhood is a demographic that we would have or had at one point at the firehouse.
All the volunteers is kind of doing their own thing until a call comes in. And how many members, active members or skilled members or qualified members does it take overall in a firehouse to get a truck or a unit to congeal and get out the door? Because you have many people to draw from, but not everyone can do it. They're just neither not in town. I mean, a lot of obstacles there. So what's the optimum size of a volunteer firehouse, and who would those people be?
Well, to put a truck on the road, let's say an engine to respond to a fire or to a car fire, you need 3 certified firefighters to put that engine on the road. It can't roll with anything less. For the medical unit, we have a squad. It responds to emergency medical calls. It's 2 people. I saw our best years at East Wallingford, our most productive years being somewhere between 25 and 30 certified firefighters with EMS folks kind of built in there. But we always had it as you had an EMS certification and a fire certification, and the membership was right around 25 or 30. I saw it as the most productive years.
So what percentage of the time, and this is rough, but what percentage of the time can you get all these members of the volunteer fire unit to, I use the word congeal, to get together, man a truck, man a unit, and get out the door in time to be of use? Because obviously the careers are there all the time. They're there 24/7. You're not. You got to come from your homes.
Yes.
So what percentage of the time can you get there to make a difference?
Statistics right now are for the engine somewhere around 65%. It's getting on the road before the incident is terminated, or maybe they're canceled en route. There's some factors built in on the top end of that. Like you said, the careers are there. The career members are there. If they get on the road right away and the call's downgraded right away, they might cancel the volunteer truck before they even get a chance to get to the station. So right now, I think the response rate for the engine is right around 65%, and the squad, the medical unit, is probably pretty close to that as well.
I'm wondering whether or not there are 2 visions for volunteer corps. One vision is that we don't really need firefighters much anymore. There are fewer fires than there ever were. Most calls are medical. We want our volunteer corps to be basically not volunteer firefighters. So we need some of them, but we need volunteer medical responders.
Sure.
And so there needs to be a shift in recruitment and a shift in training. And the firefighting component is not going to get the attention, the resources, the money, the recruitment that it has in the past. Does that make any sense to you? And if so, why?
It doesn't to me, because I think they're conjoined. They're joined. EMS and fire in a fire department, because we are in Wallingford, it is a fire department, will always be kind of meshed together. The problem we're seeing, if that is the mindset, and we want more EMS and maybe let the fire end wane off a little bit, there's no recruitment happening for either. There's an EMR course that's one step below EMT. East Wallingford has been trying to get going at this. I was working on it in July for a couple of months. The career chief stepped in and said, okay, we're going to have an outside contractor come in and do it, but we're not paying for it up front, and we will not give you any type of advertisement. We're not going to do any recruitment for it at all. No tax money can be used for that, for EMS recruitment. And
is it more of a challenge to get volunteers enthusiastic about all the training they have to do? I mean, they're volunteers, for goodness sakes, you know,
Sure.
And training, I think, is probably getting more specialized and more advanced.
Mm-hmm.
But how would you react to that? Volunteers just harder to train and keep them trained up. True, false?
I don't think so. The folks that we get in are really highly motivated. If they're going to spend that time and do training that realistically is as hazardous or as deadly as working on an actual incident. The risk is there. They're operating at heights over 30 feet, carrying hundreds of pounds of equipment. They're going into atmospheres to train that can kill them. I mean, it's imminently dangerous. But we see these folks coming in and they want to do the work, and they're highly motivated, especially the younger folks, the men and women that are coming in that are younger. They want to get the experience, and they want to use it as a stepping stone to get on a job somewhere else. In Wallingford, the volunteers were always, for as long as I can remember, a farm team. They were a feeder system for the career department. And that was the natural evolution of a volunteer. And you see those folks coming in, they're highly motivated. They want to train. They want to go out and get dirty. I've never really seen the intensity or the amount of training, or I haven't seen up until this point, be a deterrent. Let's
make that the final word.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on the show. Viewers appreciate it. I appreciate it. And we've all learned a lot. Thanks again. Good luck. Our thanks to Joe Czentnar, Deputy Chief, and our thanks to Eddie Garlick. And folks, thanks for watching. There you have it. Two different perspectives on the volunteer fire department. They're not necessarily competing perspectives or inconsistent perspectives, but there's enough in those interviews to raise some concern as to the future of the Wallingford volunteer fire system. With the challenges nationally and locally of recruiting and retaining and training volunteers, with the staffing at East Wallingford going down, we saw that chart with the number of certified firefighters. How long can East Wallingford hang on? And what can be done, if anything, to give them a boost? One option, of course, is to put money into it, to try to put money into recruiting and training and things like that. But on the other hand, there's disadvantages to that because you're not sure, no one can guarantee that will yield enough volunteers to make the expenditures and the effort worthwhile. So it's a bit of a conundrum. But one thing I am sure, the question is worth examining and discussing. And that's what we've tried to do with this episode of the Citizen Mike Show, open up the issue so that you're better informed if this should ever come up in the public sphere in some meeting or some article, at least you've been well grounded on some of the background. Thanks everyone for watching the Citizen Mike Show.